The last thing she ever taught me was how to make coffee. The strange part wasn't the lesson itself. The strange part was that she started teaching me everything. Passwords, documents, phone numbers, things I had never asked to learn, and things she had always handled herself without ever making me feel the gap in my knowledge. At first I thought she was preparing to leave me. 3 months later I learned the truth, and I would have given anything to be wrong. It started on a Tuesday morning that looked like every other Tuesday morning we had shared across 6 years of shared mornings. She stood beside me at the kitchen counter and said, "I should probably learn how to do this myself." And I laughed because it sounded like the gentle observation of someone pointing out a small and harmless inadequacy. And she smiled and began showing me, and I followed along without understanding that I was being given something I would one day need more than I could have imagined standing there in the ordinary light of that ordinary morning. She showed me the exact temperature, the specific number of seconds the water needed to rest before it touched the grounds, the measurement she had always done by feel rather than by any instrument, the particular quality of the pour that she said made the difference between something that was merely coffee and something that was actually worth drinking. In the weeks that followed, she began showing me other things with the same quiet and unhurried patience she had brought to the coffee lesson. She showed me where the important documents lived in the filing system she had maintained with an organization and a care I had always relied on, without developing any relationship with myself. She shared passwords to accounts she had always managed on behalf of the life we shared together, walked me through the infrastructure of our daily existence that had always run smoothly because she had always been the one running it. She began leaving written instructions in places where they would eventually be found, specific and practical and detailed in the way of someone writing for a reader rather than for themselves, tucked into drawers and attached to things and placed in the locations where the information would be needed when the moment arrived that required it. None of it announced itself as significant while it was happening. That was the thing I would return to repeatedly in the months that followed, when I was trying to understand how I had been present for all of it without understanding any of it. It felt like organization, like a thoughtful person deciding to bring more order to the practical details of a shared life, which was entirely consistent with who she had always been. One evening I asked her directly what had prompted all of it, what was behind the sudden and thorough accounting of everything I had never needed to know. She looked at me with the particular smile she used when she had already decided how much of the truth she was going to offer, and she said, "Because you never know," and moved to the other room, and I let the answer settle without examining what it was actually settling over. She began reaching backward into her life in the months that followed, reconnecting with things and people that had drifted to the edges over the years. We had been building something together at the center. Old friends received phone calls from her, long ones she took in the other room, the kind of conversations that carry the quality of accounting in them, of things finally being said that have been waiting for the right circumstances to be said in. She visited places from her childhood, some alone and some with me, and she moved through them with an attention that felt different from nostalgia, more deliberate, like someone taking an inventory of specific and important things rather than simply revisiting the past for the comfort of it. She called her parents with a frequency and a quality of presence that I noticed without naming, something in the calls that felt like she was giving them more of herself than usual, making deposits of a kind I didn't have language for until much later, when the language was no longer something I needed in order to understand what she had been doing. She took photographs of things that had always been present but never photographed. The apartment in the particular quality of morning light that came through the east window. The dog in the position he always chose on the left side of the couch. Small and specific moments that had always been ordinary enough to pass without documentation. She saved voice recordings she made herself, and when I asked about them, she said she liked the way certain moments sounded, and changed the subject in the easy and practiced way of someone who has prepared for the question. I was watching all of it, and assembling it into the only story that fit the evidence as I understood it at the time. I believed she was preparing to leave, that the organization and the backward reaching and the careful documentation of everything I had never learned were the quiet preparations of someone who had made a decision and was trying to make the aftermath of that decision as manageable as possible for the person being left. It was the explanation that fit, and I held on to it because I didn't have another one, and because asking directly felt like it might make real something. I wasn't ready to have be real. Then I found the notebook. It was sitting on her side of the bed with a plain cover that gave nothing away, and I opened it without any particular expectation, because nothing about its appearance suggested what it contained. Her handwriting filled the pages in lists that were specific in the way of things written for a reader who is not the person writing them. How to reset the router using the sequence that actually works, rather than the one printed on the label. The name of the mechanic she had always handled, with specific instructions about what to say to get the honest account of what the car actually needed. The name of the doctor I could never remember, the one she had researched and found and scheduled on my behalf because, left to myself, I would have continued not going indefinitely. How to calm the dog during storms, which required the weighted blanket and the specific song, through the small speaker and the precise location on his chest, where sustained pressure helped him settle into something like calm. Emergency contacts in order of relevance, with notes beside each name, explaining not just the identity of the person, but the specific circumstances under which they were the right person to call. Each page carried more weight than the one before it, in a way I felt before I could explain. I put the notebook down and went to find her, and asked directly, with the specific and frightened directness of someone who has been building toward a question for weeks and has finally run out of reasons to keep deferring it. I asked if she was planning to leave me. She paused for long enough that the pause became its own answer before the actual answer arrived, long enough for the full shape of what I was afraid of to make itself completely present in the space between us. Then she said no, and changed the subject, and I wanted to believe her completely, and mostly I did, and partly I couldn't. And that night I found evidence of appointments she hadn't mentioned, at a medical center across the city, recurring across months. She told me on a Sunday morning when the light was slow, and the apartment was quiet, in the way it was quiet on mornings when neither of us had anywhere to be. She had known for 7 months. The appointment that delivered the information had been one she attended alone, and she had returned from it and made dinner and sat beside me through an entire evening without allowing anything different to be visible, and I had not seen anything because she had not permitted anything to be seen. She had kept it from me not because of any failure of trust between us, but because she had watched me lose someone before, and had seen with precise and loving clarity what that loss had required of me to survive. And she had decided that what she could give me was not the shared weight of the knowing, but the preparation to survive what the knowing was eventually going to produce. Everything rearranged itself in the space of that Sunday morning. The coffee lesson, and the documents, and the passwords, and the notebook with its specific and practical and heartbreaking instructions, all of it shifted from one meaning to another in a single conversation, each memory landing differently now that I understood what it had actually been. She had not been teaching me how to live without her in the way I had feared during the weeks of misreading. She had been teaching me how to keep living after her, which required something different from her, and cost something different from both of us, and which she had undertaken with the same deliberate and patient care she had always brought to the things that mattered most to her. I was not teaching you how to need me less, she said. I was teaching you how to need yourself more. After she was gone, I began finding what she had left behind, not all at once, but across the weeks and months that followed in the gradual and considered way that was entirely consistent with how she had always done everything that mattered. Notes placed in books she had known I would eventually reach for, tucked between specific pages with a precision that made clear she had thought carefully about what I would be reading and what I would need in the moment of reading it. Voice recordings left with instructions about sequence, her voice in them ordinary and specific and entirely herself, talking about small things with the ease of someone who understood that small things are what people most need to hear when the large things have become too heavy to approach directly. Letters written for future dates she would not be present for, sealed and labeled in her handwriting, for the birthday and the anniversary, and the undated day she had somehow known would arrive when I would sit in the apartment alone and need something to remind me that moving forward was still the right direction. I opened each one at the time she had marked on the envelope, and each one contained what I needed, and nothing in excess of it. Her precision with words applied even here in these final and most important communications. The last envelope was at the bottom of the box, labeled simply for when you're ready, and I carried it with me for 3 weeks before I understood that ready had arrived, and I opened it the way you open something you know exists in a single use, carefully and without rushing. Inside was a single page in her handwriting, dated years before I had known anything was wrong. If you are reading this, it said, then the plan worked. You're still here. For months I believed she had been preparing to leave me. The truth was harder than that, and more generous, and more completely her than anything I could have constructed from my own imagination. She had been preparing me to survive losing her, using the only materials she trusted to do the work, which were not grand gestures or beautiful words, but specific and practical and unglamorous knowledge delivered in the ordinary moments of ordinary mornings. She taught me how to make the coffee, and every morning when I make it now, measuring by feel the way she showed me, I get it right. And somehow that is both the hardest and the most important thing she ever gave me.